So how has everyone been enjoying the day so far? Great. I've been hearing a lot of good things, and so glad to hear that you all are enjoying yourselves and finding the content for the day useful. So I'm delighted to introduce our final plenary for the day. This plenary is going to be focused on crafting solutions, unblocking progress toward gender and racial economic equity. And I have the honor of introducing my friend, Julie Cashin, who's moderating this panel. Julie is a senior fellow and the director for Women's Economic Justice at the Century Foundation. With expertise in work and family, caregiving, economic mobility, and labor. Julie has more than 2 decades of experience forwarding these issues in federal and state government and through the nonprofit sector, including helping to draft 3 major pieces of national legislation. As a labor policy advisor to the late Senator Edward M. Kennedy, she helped draft and build momentum for the first paid sick days bill in Congress, the Healthy Families Act. As policy director of the 3-year Make It Work campaign, she drafted a visionary child care proposal whose principles were incorporated into the Child Care and Working Families Act. And as a senior advisor to the National Domestic Workers Alliance, she led the work to create and introduce the first ever National Domestic Workers Bill of Rights. Yes. Julie has an extensive resume in this space, as well as, just a record of being such a passionate advocate for economic justice and women's issues. So Julie, over to you.
Thank you. It's so great to be here, and I'm going to take moderator's privilege to just ask for another round of applause for Dr. Jamila Taylor, because I think all of us in the community who know her are just so thrilled to have her leadership at the Institute for Women's Policy Research. It could not be a better fit. So we're thrilled. And I'm so happy to be helping to close out the day here. So we started our day talking about the intersections of care, gender, and racial inequality. We heard from experts in workshops about challenges of an aging population, retirement gaps in elder care, the undervaluation of care work in the human services sector, care, immigration, and job quality, or measuring gaps and identifying funding sources. And we weren't all able to go to all of those. And so I asked my colleagues to capture some of the highlights just to give you real quick. So thank you, Leah and Laura. So one thing that folks may have missed or got to hear is Nancy Fulbright talking about is care undervalued because it's provided by disempowered groups, or are disempowered groups relegated to care work because it's undervalued? It's not mutually exclusive, but it's a really important question. So I had missed that, and I was thrilled that we got that captured. Also, Ariane was talking about how the undervaluation of women's work is recognized as pay discrimination in almost every other country. Dr. Jenny Romich talked about how wage gaps are not because jobs require less skill. They're in spite of the fact that they are incredibly skilled jobs. So some of the highlights of things that some of us may not have gotten to hear in some of the breakout groups. But now we're going to talk about crafting solutions, unblocking progress toward gender and racial economic equity. And we have this amazing group of experts that we're going to talk to today. Young Yoon was going to be here with us from the National Domestic Workers Alliance. Unfortunately, she wasn't able to be. So the hope was that we'd be able to have a rich discussion, including immigration, which is her expertise. We will not be able to do that without her here, but we will think about those themes as well. And when I think about unlocking progress, I think about what that means, right? So in my spare time, when I'm not policy wonking, I'm a certified life coach. And I work with people to support them to get from where they are to where they want to be. And that work starts with dreaming big about where they want to be. And then thinking about what's the gap between where they are today and what that vision is, and creating a journey, a map, a how to get from one place to the next. So, as you think about today, we started with a shared analysis of the problem. So, we really understand where we're coming from. And now, this is the time when we get to think about what could the future look like? How do we imagine and dream and vision what we're working toward and why we need to get there and what we need to do to get there, too. So, let's get on with it. Let's hear about these dreams. Let's hear about where we are now and what's in between our dreams and our current reality. And we'll start with Professor Derek Hamilton. He's a university professor, the Henry Cohen Professor of Economics and Urban Policy, and founding director of the Institute on Race, Power, and Political Economy at the New School. His resume is much longer than that. I encourage you to read it, but I'm going to let you hear from him now.
Well, thank you, Julie. I can talk loud. I'm not sure if this is on. Oh, Trey. So quick shout out to Jamila Taylor for leading. Oh yeah, we'll clap again. Yeah. The part on my resume that you didn't include that I'm extremely proud of is I'm on the board of the Institute for Women's Policy Research, and very grateful for everybody in that organization and the work that has been done and will be done. I don't believe there's a more, well, I guess there are people in this room, I got to be careful. It is one of the leading organizations in collaboration that will, all right. So let me get into this. All right. Right, so our task at hand. I wrote a paper with Cassie Robertson in which we made the point that industrial policy should not be separable from labor policy. They should be one and the same. It's a problem that we separate them. It is also the case that industrial policy, the best form that has happened throughout time and history, has been those that have centered people and the environments in which they live. And that's a conception of a care economy. So in determining how to define, structure, and direct public resources with the purpose of promoting economic health and industrial activity, here's another point that we don't do in economics. We should first and foremost begin with a simple but fundamental question: what is the purpose of an economy? And then what is government's role in achieving that purpose? I think if we ask that question, we might come up with something different than what we have. It's naive also to not recognize that every policy structure in the US, it's grounded in race, it's grounded in gender and social stratification more broadly. And the impact of these stratifications are certainly not exclusive to Black people and women. So you're going to hear me in this framing make the point that identity group stratification, politics, and economics are not separable. It's not novel that economics and politics are related or that gender and economics are related, but it's the intersection of all three. Throughout human history, race, gender, and social identity more broadly has had a profound role in shaping outcomes. The paradox in empirical reality is that race and gender-based disparities persist and even widen with higher socioeconomic status. The empirical reality is vivid when it comes to wealth, but it's not limited to wealth. Education as an explanatory power and human capital go well beyond wealth and their limitations in understanding stratification. Moreover, if we look across business cycles, these disparities widen with higher levels of education and across business cycle, further emphasizing the role of social identity hierarchy in establishing the sorting mechanisms, and it gets magnified through recessions. Let me get to solutions. I see I don't want to ramble on. You've all heard all the problems and know the problems, but from the beginning, the American project, our government has proactively shaped our economy in determining who reaps benefits from prosperity. The proactive role of government in determining winners and losers, especially by race and gender, should be undeniable. There's no aspect of our economy that's beyond its purview of the continuous involvement of government. But all is not lost for us. The good news is that our power is in collective agency. Our agency lies not in the mythic notion of pull yourself up, self help, or individualized solutions, but in political power. Ultimately, in asking that question about the economy, our economy is a choice variable. We get to determine and define value. All markets, all economic relationships are political choices enforced by our government through both the discourse, our laws, as well as the policies. Exerting a claim on our economy requires building movements and organizations that can exact demands and conditions that affirmatively and inclusively empower all people with the resources to be self determining and have economic agency. So, going back to that fundamental question of what is the purpose of an economy and what is government's role, I believe the purpose of an economy should be to promote our productive capacities in righteous ways, to advance tranquility and human flourishing, to enable people to be self determining in righteous ways. And we have a pathway to achieve it. Although not complete or perfect, when Eleanor Roosevelt, 75 years ago, in the International Coalition issued the United Nations landmark Declaration of Human Rights, it presented a blueprint. In isolation, those rights or subsets of those human rights are inadequate and, in fact, are a co optation of a notion of rights and freedom. A right to assembly, speech, choice, it's limited if an individual lacks basic needs like a job, adequate income, shelter, food, or health care. Over time, economic rights are the one category that seem to have lost momentum in that human rights paradigm. But the Marshall Plan and policies in the New Deal and Great Society, and we know they were inadequate and excluded lots of women and lots of black people and lots of people from the global south. But they demonstrate what realizing the ambitions set out in the Declaration would look like, especially as they relate to making investments in people in place. We need industrial policy to center people in the environment, not in a charitable sense, but in a productive sense, enabling them with the resources to contribute in dynamic ways to the economy. It is the best foreign as well as domestic policy, especially if we want to value and promote tranquility. I feel like my time is limiting, so I'm gonna try to get to a conclusion real quick. An inclusive economic frame turns the notion of our political economy that naturalizes poverty and inequality as the unproductive, as the result of unproductive and deficient behavior, it turns it on its head. That is, poverty and inequality become the result of policy choices that deny people the resources they need to live meaningful lives. There's a baseline set of enabling goods and services that are critical for individuals to have self determination, without which they are incapable of reaping economic returns for their efforts or their ingenuity. Governments need to directly compete with and crowd out inferior private options that do not ensure universal and quality health care, housing, schooling, financial services, capital, and free mobility without the psychological and physical threat of detention or bodily harm at the hands of a state sanctioned violence, the capacity to reproduce and choose your family without the state sanctioned violence or reductions because your identity is linked to a stigmatized group. In the end, our economic system and industrial policy needs to promote that economy that centers people. These investments need to be made permanently and intentionally inclusive of gender, race, ethnicity, and social identity in general by design, implementation, and management. Otherwise, we will falter in achieving a free, just society.
Thank you so much. No problem. I'm going to ask a few follow-up questions before we move on to Charity, but maybe Charity, if you want to switch mics, if this one's not working, or if someone could help us with the mic. Thank you. Um, So a follow-up, I mean, what a great framework for us to be thinking about all of this within. And I know some of the specific policies that you talk about and have thought about are basic income guarantees and baby bonds. Um, and that, we are talking today a lot about childcare and paid leave, paid sick days, home and community-based services, role of domestic workers and direct care workers. Would love to hear about how these policies fit into the framework that you're putting out there.
So, I mean, essentially, unless we're recording, I can be loud as well. Right. So we are getting a lot of attention in ways that we haven't in the past with some of these bolder ideas from the last 50 years, but they're not that new. Right. I was trying to point to there's been points in time and history in which we've done them in inadequate ways. Some things that we need to be careful from is pushing forward issues without a North Star conception of justice and freedom. So baby bonds need not compete with uh, access to reproductive rights, both in terms of being able to terminate a pregnancy as well as being able to have access to the resources to procreate and choose love. It need not compete with guaranteed income. And the way for them not to compete with this is to have a conception of a North Star, of economic rights. And that, I think, is part of the point. And then how have we been able to get to this point? Social movements, right? The Biden administration has done a whole lot of unprecedented things, but also people have made them do those unprecedented things, right? Compare and contrast how we handled the pandemic versus the Great Recession. So these things that people would have thought of as pie in the sky, and there was a lot of suffering and vulnerability during the pandemic. But could you have imagined that the federal government, through the IRS, of all means, sent trillions of dollars in the form of direct cash to the American people? And if not for a couple of senators, we might have had a refundable child tax credit. This is antithetical to the thinkings that we've had in the last 50 years, that if you gave poor people money, you would incentivize irresponsible behavior, and they would be getting these resources in an unfair way. So conception very well may be changing. We now may be, and there are lots of reasons as to why, and lots of overtones as to why. It took a pandemic where we dealt with this crisis, where we were willing to do some of these things. It took George Floyd on TV, where we had people across the nation shouting in unison that Black Lives Matter. So, at the risk of going on and on and on, I think we have to always be ready with the policies and the commitment to what we think and know is right. I think that the solutions are not that deep. Baby bonds as a policy is grounded in the simple fact that how is wealth generated? It is wealth that begets more wealth. So baby bonds is designed to provide people with the necessary resource to achieve wealth. Capital. Capital at a key point in their life. Somebody asked me the question once before about guaranteed income. What, are you just going to give poor people money? The answer is yes. And why are you going to give them money? Because they're poor, because they don't have enough, right? But it is essentially thinking about these things not as charity, but resources to facilitate people to be their best selves. We always think about lines on a ledger in government that go to firms as investments, but lines on a ledger that go to people as costs. Flip that, invest in people, and it will benefit us all.
Thank you. Amazing. All right, I can't wait to get back to you, but I'm gonna move on. Speaking of collective agency, Charity Wilson is a legislative representative in the advocacy hub of the AFL-CIO, where she works on the women's economic agenda, criminal justice reform, federal workers issues, and unemployment compensation. Charity is also an amazing person to work with, and I am so thrilled that I get to work with her. And I want to talk to you. You think a lot about the union advantage, the role of collective bargaining and organizing, and especially in the context of care and care policy. Would love to start with your own story about why a union matters so much to individuals, to families' lives, and to care.
Thank you so much. And I can say the same to Julie. Uh, Julie is a leader among those working on care issues across the country. And anything that she's a part of, I want to associate myself with because it's going to be very good. Um, I have a family history with unions. My grandfather in the 30s in Alabama helped start a union at the mine where he worked. He was a coal miner, TCI. I found out in doing a little bit of research that not only did he help start that union, he also was part of a case before the Supreme Court where defining work under the federal labor standards as part of the National Labor Relations Act. I did not know that until 2 days ago. I saw Muskota local, and I said that was his local. And even though he did die of lung cancer, he had a pension, which in rural Alabama, to work your whole life and to have a pension was relatively unheard of. My father was a Teamster. When he retired from the Army, he went to work at General Electric. He became a Teamster. And he was, through his union, he was able to buy a home, send 3 children to college, and again, retire with a comfortable pension. Now, this is where I come into that story. As a young child, I was diagnosed with what they then called juvenile diabetes. It's now known as type 1 diabetes. It's a very young child. Because my father had health insurance and I was his dependent, I was able to obtain the insulin and supplies that I needed to literally keep me alive. I was able to obtain the newest technology, whether it was a glucometer, an insulin pump, or continuous glucose monitor, far before most other diabetics could. And then as an adult, I've been a union member most of my adult life, and I'm currently a member of the Newspaper Guild, CWA. I can literally say that being in a union family not only improved my life, it literally saved my life. And one thing that my father always would point out to me was that I had the union advantages. And he would point out that it was because he was in a union. He felt that strongly about it. My friends did not. Their families did not. I had a friend whose mother died of a preventable illness, but she had no health insurance. And he pointed out that they were just like me. The difference was through his job, through his union, he had health insurance, that family did not. So that has actually illuminated every step of the way that I've taken in my professional life. And I am honored not just to work for the AFL-CIO, I'm honored to work for union people.
Thank you, Charity. Wow. Over the years under Heidi and Ariane, IWPR has done a lot of really great research about the union advantage for women. And I think the combination of that amazing data and stories like Charity's really paints the picture of what it can mean to come together, to organize, to collectively bargain. And here we are, talking about care specifically. So I wondered if you could talk a little bit about what's the relationship between care and the labor movement and labor unions?
Well, at the AFL, we realized that our members are both consumers of care. They have their children in child care. When they need help themselves, there's care available for them most of the time. And as they become older and they're taking care of elderly adults in the family, whether it's their parents or adult children who may have a disability. So they are consumers of care. that's necessary for them to work. It's just like the infrastructure of a highway. Just like you take the highway or the bus to get to work, you also need that care infrastructure to get to work also. We also represent the predominantly women, mostly women of color, over representation of immigrant women who provide that care, and increasingly so. And we know from this warning that the reasons why that work is so devalued, even though it is really the most important work that there is out there, taking care of our loved ones. And so we represent them both, those who consume and those who provide.
Thank you. And I feel like, with all of this union power behind us, we should be winning, right? And there are unfortunately a lot of blocks along the way. And I'm curious if you could talk about what some of those blocks are.
Well, I'll tell you, we are winning. Unions are more popular now than they've ever been. There are all kinds of organizing that's going on out there, but it's really that we're winning and we're organizing against great headwinds. For 40, 50, 60 years, there have been attacks on the laws that protect organizing in the United States. There is a whole industry that has developed that does nothing but tell employers, this is how you prevent your employees from forming a union. Over the past couple of weeks, we've had 2 states that have moved legislation to basically penalize companies in the state who agree to card check. Georgia and Alabama, and card check is recognizing a union because the majority of the workers sign a card saying that they want to be represented by a union. So against those headwinds, we have been able to. But just think about it. If we really had the protections of the National Labor Relations Act, which they're so much stronger under President Biden, they were weakened by a campaign for all these decades. Then under President Trump, there was a conscientious effort to weaken those laws and the regulations and the enforcement of those laws. So we're making a comeback. We know that women have been leading the comeback of union organizing, very young women, women of color in the LGBTQ community. And they have had a rough time in doing so, but they have stood up for their union and for their fellow workers.
Thank you. And last question for you is what's the plan for unblocking progress?
Well, you might have heard your union brother and sisters talk about something called the PRO Act, and that's Protecting the Right to Organize Act. That is extremely important to us because we're trying to undo decades of damage that have been done to union organizing. And basically what that law would do is, this is going to sound like common sense stuff to you, but make it illegal for employers to retaliate against workers who organize unions. Make it illegal for employers to fire people when they're on strike and replace them. Basically, it evens the playing field for workers. There's lots of intimidation. There would no longer would employers be able to have mandatory meetings where they basically put employees into a room and tell them how bad the union is for an hour. Very intimidating. Tactics like when there isn't a union election, putting the mailbox where you put your ballot in right in front of the door that everybody walks in so they know who voted and they can assume how you're voting one way or the other. The PRO Act has passed the House before, and we believe that it is going to become law. The president supports the PRO Act, and I'm going to say it over and over again. If you leave here with one thing, and that is pass the PRO Act, because that's going to help increase union membership.
Thanks, Charity. So we've started with this framework around justice and freedom and economic rights North Star. We've talked about the union advantage for women, the need to pass the PRO Act. We're going to move to Latifa Lyles now. Latifa is Senior Advisor to the Secretary for Women in Construction at the Department of Commerce. And I highly recommend following Latifa's career from the Gender Policy Council, the Women's Bureau at the Department of Labor. Amazing work over the years. And, we at the Century Foundation, where I work, we've written about the links between industrial policy and care policy, how, there's a real connection between the need to have care policy to support that workforce and to make sure there's policies in place where we can diversify the workforce, both because it's the right thing to do, but also because it's the economic thing to do, because there won't be enough people to fill the industrial jobs that have been created out of the legislation that's passed over the last 3 years if we don't diversify those jobs. So you've been doing amazing work on this. And can you talk a little bit about your vision for that work?
Yes, thank you so much. And first, I wanted to just echo my co-panelists. You talked about everyone reaping the benefits of prosperity. And I think that is fundamentally what the government right now is challenged to do with this new set of policies and investments. And there's no guarantee that everybody will be able to reap the benefit of prosperity across the country unless we're very intentional. I just wanted to just at a high level thank everybody here, thank IWPR. In 2 weeks, we will be passing I think it was a year ago, April 18th, the president signed the CARE executive order, which included more than 50 actions at every cabinet level agency, nearly, and essentially did what we could to expand access to affordable, high quality care and provide support for care workers and family caregivers. As well, speaking of the administration doing things people ask us to do or make us do, the president also signed the first ever proclamation designated April as National Care Worker Recognition Month, which is also because of the advocates and the folks on the ground that was signed. Among the actions laid out in the EO included several things. I'm going to focus on the actions that directed agencies to consider applicants for federal job creation or workforce development funds to provide affordable, accessible, safe, reliable childcare and long-term care for workers, as well as supportive services. And we also asked, the EO also asked agencies to consider preferencing applicants that use the funds for this purpose to encourage applicants to use their funds to be as innovative as possible in providing access to childcare and other services. We have an unprecedented level of federal infrastructure investments under this administration, and multiple federal agencies are asking themselves this question: what can we do to make sure that our workforce investments ensure workers have access to supportive services? And also, what can we make sure that those services span both the jobs and the job training programs? As part of the Department of Commerce's workforce development agenda, we've set principles for highly effective workforce investments, including our principles, meaning what we're trying to apply to all our programs, is that they are employer-led, ensure skilled workers are connected to quality job opportunities. This is extremely important, and there has been a lot of efforts to try to improve the workforce development system across the country to have more metrics and more just more systems to connect people to jobs as opposed to just to train people. So this is something that is really, really critical. And basically what we're doing is we're asking the funding recipients to form very, very strong community partnerships, both with labor and educational institutions for that reason. Services I talked about, wraparound services, especially for those in economically disadvantaged communities, increase educational and workplace diversity, equity, and inclusion, including prioritizing earn and learn models like registered apprenticeships, leading to stackable, in the programs leading to stackable industry recognized credentials, and measuring and evaluating outcomes as workers get jobs and complete programs. One of the things we're doing specifically at the department under the CHIPS and Science Act, which is a $39 billion program that will provide direct funding, loans, and loan guarantees to support semiconductor manufacturing in the United States. The investment will catalyze long-term economic sustainable growth in this industry and support U.S. economic and national security. Good jobs are at the center of the Chips for America vision for a vibrant and domestic semiconductor industry. It is not what you read in the papers. It is not what is typically covered, where there's a lot of conversation about, this goal the president has. Some of the companies who are looking to build in the United States, there's a lot in that bill, but I think the workforce piece is something we're trying to lift up more and more, because really we have a construction workforce and we have a semiconductor workforce who's going to be operating the facilities. And we really want to try to use intentional strategies for these investments. And essentially, what we were able to do is in the notice of funding opportunity, we were able to say that for anyone applying for $150 million or more, you are required to provide a child care plan for both facilities workers and construction workers. And applicants under the funding threshold are also strongly encouraged to do so as well. It's really a first of its kind commitment. It also means that there's a lot of ways this can go really well, and there are a lot of things that we can trip over along the way. And so we've really appreciated a lot of the inputs that we've been getting from the community on how to make this work on the ground. We know there's not a one-size-fits-all solution. For one, we expect applicants to devise data-driven solutions responsive to their specific needs of their workforce and geographies. We really want employers to do analysis to understand what their employees need, how many are parents, how many of parents have young kids. We really want to make sure that the community table is set and there's transparency ultimately. So what we're trying to do with these semiconductor companies is make sure that any and all plans and commitments are public, and any of all goal setting and tracking is public as well. There's a lot going on the ground that I think is really, really notable. And I just want to say that coming from the labor department years ago and working on economic security issues, why I'm at Commerce today is because we have a secretary who's extremely excited about the opportunity that she has to, rattle the industry to try to get more women in these jobs. And so, the same way we talk about, harassment and educational opportunity, the lack of care infrastructure is really what keeps so many women out of some of these higher paying jobs. And with construction, these are not jobs that require a four-year degree, and they're among the highest paying jobs that don't require a four-year degree. And there's certainly the supply question of knowing that we have lots of jobs that need to be filled. But frankly, we believe that it's also a way that we can potentially shift the paradigm in the industry, which we think if we can do that in construction, maybe we can do it in other industries, since construction is so incredibly difficult nut to crack. These are hundreds of thousands of jobs in the short term. And we know that there are a lot of STEM-related jobs related to the CHIPS and Science Act, too, which I'm not going to get into. But ultimately, what we're trying to say is, as we create a new economy in some cities, as we try to create a new industry, new jobs, if we assume everything we already know, we're never going to get there. And so what we're trying to do is to apply more knowledge, and also to try to do things differently. And frankly, there's no guarantee that any of this will work. There's a lot of entrenched industries that, for a whole host of institutional reasons, are not amenable or palatable or sustainable for women, and they could be. And so, talking more to folks that are getting it right, and folks who have sustainable careers where they can support their families, is really what we're trying to lift up. And we're also trying to say, again, the construction companies come to the table, unions come to the table, the CHIPS owners come to the table and figure out publicly how they can make this happen. So there's the other piece of this, which I think we are not talking about as much either, is the fact that We are also trying to make sure that these jobs are good quality jobs. We know that in manufacturing, there's a lot of wide variation between a good quality job and a not so good quality job, women tending to be in the not so good quality jobs. And so in the shops as well as the construction workforce, we are trying to make sure that those job quality standards, I'll call them in this case, are present. And as long as we have the money and as long as we're here, we're going to try to incentivize that money as best we can.
Thank you. Yeah. I feel like you kind of got to, well, first I just want to note how, the theme of occupational segregation, right? That came up a lot. And this is an initiative that really is addressing that head on. Also just want to make the connection, Professor Hamilton was talking about the industrial policy is labor policy. And this may be the first time an administration has ever thought about the people who are part of industrial policy. And so that's a really powerful change. All good. So just curious if you have thoughts on, there are all these researchers and policy experts in the room. How can they help? And I will just put in a plug. We have this beautiful slide at the Century Foundation about the opportunities and risks of the CHIPS and childcare program. And so happy to share that as part of that research.
So
how can policy experts and researchers in this room help and support this work?
So one thing that is just talking about these new policies and how they're playing out on the ground. One thing that is really a big part of my job is working across federal agencies. So I work very closely with DOT. I work very closely with energy. The vast majority of construction workforce dollars is going through the Department of Transportation. And so, a lot of this policy making is not with the eyes on the ground. And so I think that there's two really important factors about all of these investments. One is that states have wide discretion on how a lot of these funds are going to be spent on the ground, which I cannot overstate. There are some governors and some localities that are taking this opportunity to introduce complementary legislation. They have investments in, New York, Oregon. They have their own CHIPS bills. There are folks that are putting in, apprenticeship requirements. For example, in Illinois, the federal highway dollars that are exclusively spent at the state level through DOT is a really critical, and we've tried very hard through the Department of Transportation to say, you can use this money for workforce, you can use this money for supportive services, you can use this money for childcare. And, that we can only say so much at this level, but it has to be reinforced at the state level. There's a lot of the implementation that is going to happen on the bipartisan infrastructure law anyway. And so we've tried to do some tables and hubs, and while the administration and the White House has the ability to be a convener, we've tried to go to cities and sort of say we're going to have a hub conversation, which brings in all of the various implementing agencies, but it also brings in labor, it also brings in the state and local government, and it also brings in the development community. In some cases, we know that the state and the public funding projects are doing so much better. There are already requirements that are built into some of these. And so we're trying to make sure that, once the money is out there, there's an accountability measure. And there's lots of ways to do that. There are opportunity committees, there's community benefit plans through the Department of Energy, but there's not one thing. And so what we're trying to do at least is to coalesce around some of these key principles that we all want to do and make sure that the right people are at the table to make sure they happen. And again, there's no guarantee that any of this is going to happen. So that's something that I think I kept up most about. The big gap is, how is this all going to culminate? How are all of our hopes and dreams going to culminate on the ground? Because that's really where, the rubber is going to meet the road. Pardon my infrastructure pun.
So good. So good. Thank you. Yes, that makes so much sense. Well, I now want to bring Amy into the conversation. Amy Matsui is the Director of Income Security and Senior Counsel at the National Women's Law Center, where she's doing work with Moms Rising, the National Domestic Workers Alliance, Family Values at Work, Caring Across Generations, and Care Can't Wait on public dollars for public investments in care. And for those who were in the session with John earlier, we talked about revenues and how we can raise revenues to pay for care. And I think the underlying vision around this work is that we could actually have affordable and great childcare, paid leave for all, care for older adults and disabled individuals in homes and communities, a well-paid workforce, a child allowance, if we just used our revenues the way that we know we need to. So, can you talk about the work you've been doing and then the new polling and messaging research you've got? I really want to hear more from you. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Julie. And I just want to say it's such an honor to be on this panel. It's such an honor to be here with all of you today. And I really appreciate just kind of the nuance and the thought and the care and just kind of the fact that this is a multidimensional conversation. And so I would like to bring you the dimension of taxes. So today I'm going to use my time on this great panel to talk about raising more public dollars and using those revenues to make public investments in care. The reason we have a tax system is so that we can pool our collective resources and invest in our shared priorities. Unfortunately, over recent decades, the share of taxes that has been paid at the top by the very wealthiest, by big corporations, has declined. And that has really constrained our ability to make the big public investments that women and families and communities have long needed and deserved. So connecting advocacy for a better tax system with advocacy for a better care system is a path forward on both fronts. So connecting fair taxes with better care might sound familiar, and that's because President Biden mentioned it. This was a vision that he raised in his State of the Union this year. And just to kind of bring back those words, what he said was, if the wealthiest and big corporations paid a fairer share of taxes, imagine the world we could create. We could have childcare, we could have paid family and medical leave, we could invest in aging and disability care, and it would make a tangible difference in the lives of women and families around this country. So even though the federal legislative package coming out of the pandemic in the summer of 2021, the Inflation Reduction Act, did not contain care investments, what it did provide was a path forward to make them. It raised taxes on big corporations by implementing a minimum corporate tax, and also by funding the IRS to go after wealthy tax cheats. It recouped kind of tax dollars that are already owed and have not been paid. And it coupled those with investments, public investments in healthcare and in a green economy. So what I want to talk to you about today is kind of what's the next opportunity in front of us to use this template to make progress on care. So we really have a watershed tax debate coming up in 2025. And making the connection between a fairer tax system and the care investments that we need and deserve to make our economy work better, to make the lives of women and families better, is really going to be important as part of that debate. In 2017, the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act was drafted and enacted and passed by a Republican-controlled Congress, and it was signed into law by President Trump. Here's what this law did. So it overwhelmingly benefited the wealthiest and big corporations. The average tax cuts that went to the top 1% of income are obscene when you compare it to what the average tax cut that families in the bottom 60% received. And as we all know, women supporting families on their own, households of color, are underrepresented in those top families and overrepresented in that bottom 60%. So we also know that the benefits of this tax law did not trickle down to workers and to average workers or to families. It did not produce economic growth. Instead, what it did was lose $2 trillion in tax revenue over 10 years. It ballooned the deficit, and it made it even harder to argue for making the big public investments for a sustainable, equitable care economy. So some provisions of the 2017 tax law were permanent, but some of them expire in 2025. So we really are at a fork in the road. We can continue to kind of pursue this failed, demonstrably false strategy of trickle-down economics and tax cuts at the top, or we can make a different decision. We can decide that the wealthiest and big corporations benefit from our economy, they benefit from our labor, we invest in them, It's time for them to pay a fairer share of taxes so the rest of us can also have that fair investment. So I'm going to take us down a little tax policy rabbit hole. Bear with me. There are 4 main goals that we want to accomplish in 2025. So first is to stop the Trump tax cuts that are expiring from being extended. Let them fade off into the sunset. Let them go. Congress should not take action to make them permanent. Second, we need to take this opportunity to enact more policies, in fact, to make the very wealthy and big corporations pay a fairer share of taxes. And there are many options to do this. There are at least half a dozen that are in President Biden's budget proposals alone. Third, we need to continue to fully fund the IRS to fairly administer these policies and to continue to support the tax credits that Professor Hamilton mentioned that help women and families with low and moderate incomes. And in fact, 2025 also offers us that opportunity to kind of make these permanent improvements to the child tax credit and potentially other refundable tax credits that benefit low and moderate income families, boost their economic security, help improve the well-being of children, health, their economics, their employment outcomes. I could go on and on. But in fact, because we know that women and households of color are overrepresented in the families that benefit from them, it also boosts racial and gender equity. So the other thing that I want to just kind of point out about 2025, now that we have gone down this little side road of the track of tax policy, is to point out that if we do this, if we're successful in making these arguments in 2025, we will raise billions of dollars in new tax revenue that can be invested in the supports and the infrastructure and the economy that all of us need and deserve, like care. So Vicki and others have mentioned the polling today. We heard about polling, and I wanted to share with you a little bit of a preview. This is the first time I've talked about this polling, so bear with me if it's a little rough. But I wanted to share some top lines from recent polling that make a connection between taxes and care. Okay, so I'll start by just kind of the little bit of information about the survey. So as you saw, this was a survey that Moms Rising and National Women's Law Center worked on with Lake Research Associates. It's an online dial survey, and it looked at, it oversampled women of color, Gen Z women, and parents of children under age 12. So, and I'm sorry, the print is really small. So I will start by some things that you all know. So first, the CARE agenda is tremendously well supported by the public. There is strong support across demographics, including race, gender, age, parental status, political affiliation, to support care policies. They also note that they believe that care investments will positively impact the ability of families to thrive and also boost the economy and jobs. The other thing that we know very well is that there's very strong public support, again, across a lot of different factors for increasing taxes on the wealthy and big corporations. So what we wanted to find out with this poll is what happens if you put the peanut butter together with the chocolate and you combine care and taxes. Here's what we found out. So after hearing that if we let the 2017 tax cuts at the top expire, we would have more to invest in things like care, 2/3 of the respondents agreed that we should let the Trump tax cuts, shorthand, for the wealthiest expire. So we kind of put this question to them, and this was their answer. We also found that after we talked to the respondents about care policies and tax policies, we actually increased support for increasing investments in care by raising taxes on the wealthy and big corporations. We got 77% of respondents saying that this was something that they favored, and it includes a strong majority of independent voters, 80% of them, and 59% of Republican voters. And the other thing I'll note is that after hearing these messages, Intense opposition to extending the Trump tax cuts at the top increased. In particular, opposition from Latinas, caregivers, Gen Z women, voters ages 50 to 64, AAPI women, and parents of kids under age 12, their opposition increased. So I know I'm running a little bit short on time, but I want to also just note that we tested some messages that connected care and taxes as part of this polling. And these were two, because the print is so small, I'm going to read them out, that got very strong support. So the first is, we should not give huge tax breaks to wealthy corporations that exploit loopholes and avoid taxes by stashing profits offshore, while working families are forced to solve the care crisis on their own. The second message that we tested that got very strong support was that it's wrong to ask families caring for loved ones and struggling to meet caregiving needs to pay for tax breaks for wealthy corporations and the wealthiest 1%. So broadly, what we found when we tested a number of narratives was a couple of themes that I just want to leave you all with. And that is, if we raise unifying themes, if we talk about things that benefit all of our families and the fact that we can band together and make policy changes, we can be those social movements. These are strongly supportive narratives that help get us where we are. We think that these results underscore the power of combining good taxes with good care policies. And we're looking forward to sharing these messages with both care advocates and tax advocates and using them to win tax fights in 2025.
Thank you so much, Amy. There's so much rich content here. I want to open it up for audience questions now, but also as panelists respond, if there was something you wanted to say in response to someone else, take panelist privilege, start with that, and then go ahead and answer the question. So do we have questions? Okay, Mia.
Hey there. Yeah. So, hi, Latifah. It's great to see you. Mia Dell, AFL-CIO. I work with Charity Wilson. We are so excited about the childcare elements of CHIPS. I mean, CHIPS in general, but the childcare elements. I'm wondering if anything is being baked into this so that surely some of this will come to be. Are you capturing the data so we can have proof of concept and rebuild it again later?
Yes. Two answers to that. One is that where possible, we're also trying to leverage and benefit the care ecosystem where these facilities are going to be built. So part of what we're hoping is that we not only, I mean, obviously construction is short term, but what we're trying to do is to pair this and encourage sort of more local measures of care and care supply and care needs that's more geographic as opposed to just related to the company. And so that is something that's going to take a lot of work, obviously, but we're really trying to make the right people at the table so that, we have more data that will help the broader state policy ecosystem as opposed to just here we want people to obviously track what's happening within their company, but we think we have a unique opportunity to actually apply this to more, measures that are at a municipal level.
We have one in the back.
Hi, I'm Robert Blecker from I'm a professor of economics here at AU. First of all, a shout out to Derek. I loved your line. The economy is a choice variable. I wrote that down. I'm going to remember that. I'll attribute you, of course. And
That's all we want is academic attribution.
to Charity, I would say my grandfather was also a union founder, so we got something in common there. I appreciate that. But my question is mostly for the last two speakers, but could be for everybody. It seems to me that the Biden administration in the economic space has done something that is both remarkable and also risky. The kind of policies you're talking about, while they have some short-term impact, they're mostly long-term. They're spread out over many years. A lot of the benefits could take years or decades even to be felt. So we're not seeing it in the polling, and it's risky because both our news media have an incredibly short attention span, and the political system in the election system is very short run focused, and we hear so much talk about the price of bananas, and we're not hearing enough about this. And that kind of relates to what Amy was saying. If you could put together a coherent package for people, they say, oh wow, I support that. And yet you look at the polling that where you don't give those choices to people, it's just sort of the raw polling. There's a disconnect between where you can move people by explaining those connections to them and where they are in terms of who they might vote for in November. And so how do we bridge those gaps politically? How do we get the long-term view, which I think it's right to take, into the political discourse, and how do we get that message out about linking issues? And I think it was actually Derek who talked about the North Star. Keep the North Star in charge of the political dialogue instead of the, latest number of the CPI or whatever it is. Thank you.
I 100% agree, and I was just, not being like a political communications professional. I will say that you're 100% right in that the vast majority of these investments are not going to bear fruit until well past this administration, in terms of job creation, in terms of local economic stimulation. So that is absolutely true. I do think that, from what we've seen is where there are very, very strong connections to communities. So those are like, we have mayors and governors and others who are, really, there's, state infrastructure. There are offices that are being created right now throughout various governor's offices. There needs to be a local story that I don't think has necessarily been told or even developed yet. And there's some promise there, but it is indeed a big challenge that we have.
So I'll kind of start with there are a couple of different things that I'll say in response to that. And I think that we're, as Latifah was saying, like we're really ill positioning ourselves if we're telling people, just hang on, like ignore the reality of your life and that you're struggling from paycheck to paycheck and that you're working an extra job to pay for childcare. We have to kind of acknowledge what people are experiencing. So I would just say two things. So one is that the tax system actually gave a proof point of government that works during the pandemic. So both because we were able to see the child tax credits get delivered to, over 90% of families who were eligible. And we heard from families in real time that when they got those extra dollars in their bank accounts, they used them to pay the bills, they used them to put food on the table, they used them to give their kids a little something or buy new shoes. They were using them for the things that their families needed, and it gave them that autonomy of choice to make the decisions that worked best for their family. And that's that's kind of as Derek was saying, like putting the money in the hands of families who need it and use it is part of a bigger economic story. It pumps money back into the economy, but it also gives people the dignity of choice and being able to make those decisions for their families. And honestly, like another proof point that we saw is from the Inflation Reduction Act funding that went to the IRS, when we saw that they're able to collect kind of, taxes that weren't paid by very wealthy people who didn't even file a tax return for many years, so that we can kind of see through the tax system that this is something that government can do. They can do it and it works. And the other thing I'll just say is that, again, I think that the proposals that are on the table, be it for childcare, paid family and medical leave, or for home and community-based services, again, there's a ramp-up time, there's investment, but it's addressing an acute need that families feel every day when they are worried about, calling to make sure that their parent's caregiver got to the house and correctly administered medicine and got the food there, and they're picking their kid up at 5 because at 5:01 they start getting charged $10 a minute. It's addressing their needs, and it's answering something that, women loud and clear said was front and center in their lives during the pandemic and every minute since.
I'll jump in again real quick and just double down on your point and say, with the child tax credit that reduced poverty and did a lot of great, but why didn't we just say that every tax policy that's a credit should be fully refundable? That why don't we stake out some claims and have some larger vision that will even help the next time the child tax credit is controversial because it it has a refundability, even with care, right? So a lot of good with the CHIPS Act to promote care, but the North Star is if we have guaranteed care for everyone. Why don't we stake out the North Star claim and then have the issues? Now, clearly, if we have the North Star claim without the issues, we'll be limited, but they both are self-reinforcing and necessary, and part of the reason why the progressive movement is limited and doesn't have sustainability.
Thanks. Other questions? And while we're getting to it, I'm just going to shout out that Kate Bond had a great article that was very much about what Amy just pointed out about the disconnect between the economics and the lack of a care infrastructure. So highly recommend that piece. Any other questions? Okay. Well, then I'm going to give everyone a chance to have one final thought. You can either give one that you were inspired from listening to everyone or answer a question around what is giving you the most hope right now. And we'll start with you. Yeah.
You know, the last 50 years that some people label as a neoliberal economy has been one where we have a rhetoric of free markets for everyone except poor people. We discipline them, and I'm not the first to say this. There's a great book by Sauce, Sanford, and Schramm, and I'm forgetting the authors' names. Why don't we flip that equation? Why doesn't the federal government engage in such a way that if you're going to have a private sector, there's a counterbalance. There's a counterbalance to that power. So there is a baseline that if on goods that are essential, without which we're vulnerable, like healthcare, right? Right now, the mechanism to determine who has access, quality, and quantity of healthcare is a price rationing mechanism. That's immoral. Why don't we have a situation, whether it's banking, whether it's medical care, essential goods that provides a baseline level that people are going to have adequate quantity, access, and quality, and after which, if you want to have a private market, have at it. But at the very least, if you're going to engage with the American people or any people, these are the terms by which you have to engage. And then really quick, taxes are critical. Of all this, if we're talking about care economy, industrial policy, the biggest fiscal tool we have is tax policy. A tax cut is activist government. It's the strategic direction of resources for industrial purposes to a certain entity or class. So we should not abandon tax policy. We should be keenly focused on it. And we should think about tax policy not just as revenue collection, but the ways in which we can strategically direct resources. We have refundable tax credits, for example. But I will have one slight counter to Amy. I don't think we need taxes to pay for things. We don't need to be constrained and to pay for with taxes. We need taxes to rein in plutocracy. There's too much power in certain domains where they can spill over into our political process and restrict us from doing things for our common good. But we've seen time in and time out that the U.S. as a sovereign monetary entity has the capabilities to fund and pay for things that lead to and enhance our productivity.
Thanks. We'll go to Amy next.
So I agree. I would be foolish to disagree, but I agree with everything that Derek just said. And I will say that the thing that's giving me hope is, I think that people deserve a lot in their lives. In order to live with dignity, we can't say there's a single silver bullet that makes people's lives sustainable and rich and rewarding and dignified, where they feel that dignity, that they're building towards the future, but they're having a good quality life now, and that they're able to savor the work that they do and also the relationships with their families. And so I think the one thing I want to say about kind of this vision of taxes is that I agree we don't need to pay for every single investment, because all of these investments are intended to make people's lives stronger and more resilient and be able to enable them to contribute, but also not kind of premise their value entirely on what they're contributing to the economy. But if we are disciplined and strategic and thoughtful and recognize kind of all of the things that all people need, I think that we can work together to raise the revenues to support, but not entirely pay for all of those investments.
Thanks, Amy. Latifa and then Charity.
Sure. It's hard. Hope. So the first thing I thought of was like a challenge. What I'm hopeful for is that we are able to start having a conversation about the lack of care impeding people's ability to work and employers' ability to get their jobs done, and not in a theoretical way. So, it's sure there'll be lots of people and women who benefit, but in the infrastructure space, what we're able potentially to say is that you started off by saying we have all these jobs that need to be filled, but there has to be job quality first and foremost, and without it, we're not going to build a bridge. We're not going to get the road back. And I think that's a slightly different way that we have been thinking about this, in a sense that we are faced with a dearth of workers who can fill a lot of the jobs that we've been talking about. And so, on the flip side, we have this opportunity could sort of, demonstrate just how entrenched these old systems and structures are, which hopefully that doesn't happen. We don't want to be 10 years from now and only white men have, gotten the million jobs we created. So I'm hopeful that, this provides an opportunity for us to try to move the narrative that can also have policy ramifications ultimately.
I guess I'm closing us out. When workers organize, workers have the power. The biggest backers of unions are Black women. And that's because Black women know that when they're in a union, their pay is going to go up. They're going to make more than their non-union sisters. They're going to make about 13% more. For Hispanic women, it's 20%. For women overall, it's 5.8%. They know that they're going to have benefits such as health care, a pension, paid time off. Union contracts, over 90% of workers have access to those. It's between 65 and 70 for non-union. These are the things that make your life livable. This is what gets you up in the morning and keeps you happy and keeps you going every single day. So although it sounds odd to basically lobby for a bill, which I did while I was speaking, it was because it's absolutely necessary. It is economic infrastructure for workers to be able to organize a union. And I'll say that I met my sister from SEIU 1199 earlier today, whose name is Faith. I'm Charity. There she is, and we both agreed, we have the hope.
Thank you so much to our brilliant panelists. One more applause. Thank you. Thank you to American University and to the Institute for Women's Policy Research. And I'll turn it over to Robin to close us out.
Say it for the last time. Is this on? Yes. Like Julie mentioned, this has been a rich conference with a lot of information, and I have been crazily taking notes trying to capture it, so I'm definitely not going to do it service, but I wanted to, again, say thank you to Julie, to Derek, to Charity, to Latifa, to Amy for an amazing panel. And I would be remiss. I've been up here. I've been emceeing. I just play an MC on TV. I am a researcher. I promise you. And so I feel that I'd be remiss if I didn't mention that being a health services researcher and one who focuses on health disparities, that I appreciate that Charity and Krishana Lloyd brought into it their lived experience. I think what is important if you're trying to change policy and influence it, that we can give a lot of data and evidence-based research, and that's what we do. But if you do not bring in the lived experience and make it relevant and relatable, it makes it hard to change the narrative, it makes it hard to make a difference. So I appreciate that, and I thank you for doing that. Okay. So I hope you enjoyed this conference. If you did, please give it another, hand of applause for just all of the speakers. I think, this has been a full day with a wealth of information. I think we have an increased awareness of the complex issues surrounding care, a clear understanding that care is undervalued and underfunded in the U.S. economy, the impact that this has on caregivers and those in need. We know that impact is worse depending on your race and ethnicity and other different intersectionalities like, gender identity, class, ability. And now with this panel, we've heard about some actionable strategies to advance equity within care. And I think, I started this session off and I talked about that everyone will receive care in their lifetime and that everyone will I'm not going to say probably, will give care to someone else in their lifetime, whether it's just because you love them or it's part of your job. And I wanted to point out that Mia Ives Ruble said earlier that everyone is worthy of care. And all of us wouldn't be in here doing the work or at this conference and I appreciate that Julie ended it, if we didn't have hope that there will be change in the care environment. So that being said, I want to close it out by, again, thanking all the speakers. I want to thank all of our funders who support IWPR's work. Without them, there would be no conference. there would be, no work. I want to, again, I know Julie said it, I want to thank American University for hosting this event and the continued partnership. I want to thank Heidi Hartman, who's the founder of IWPR. She spearheaded this collaboration with AU, and so that beyond founding the organization, but also this relationship. And as you guys know, it takes a village to put together a conference. I like to say that if you've done a meeting, it's like a duck. They're really smooth on the water, and then their feet are going crazy. So we have a lot of people that were behind the scenes being the feet of the duck, and I want to lift them up. I want to lift up our conference committee, and that is Mika Mears. Was she still in here? There she is back there. Assistant Professor Maria Cablo Sanchez, is she in here? Oh, she might. Oh, are you back there? Okay. Also, there's Sue Bach, Assistant Professor Sue Bach, is she here? Okay. And then Megan Dugan, she was the events manager of Constitution Hall. I don't know if she's here, but she might be outside. So I want to give her some credit. And then we had a number of AU students who volunteered and so forth. And then lastly, I've asked all the IWPR staff to come in. And so if you are here, I know there's some along the walls, I would ask you guys to stand up. So yes, I want to thank you guys for giving of your time and talent and to make this a success. And I know oftentimes we, particularly in leadership and those of us who do the research and sit on panels, we get our names said. So I'm going to say each of your names. I'm going to thank you. Amber, Ariane, Martinique, Emmy, Nora, Victoria, Fiona, Beth, Shannon, Ksenia, Tessa, Ben, Will, Nina, Susan, Hannah, Christy, Martha, Yasser, and Jennifer. Thank you. And I want to thank all of you guys for being here. I'm going to close it out by reminding you that we will be hosting a reception with small bites and refreshments from 5 to 7. I have been instructed to be really clear that it is a hard stop at 7 because they're going to be setting up for another event here in the morning. And then lastly, I want to invite the guests, if you like this conference, we do good conferences. So we have another conference. We have our IWPR's Power Summit It is called From Research to Revolutions, Women's Voices in Policy. This, if you've gotten to save the date has changed. This event has a new date. It's in September 23rd and 24th in the Windy City. So we will be in Chicago. Yes, I like that. That's my city. I appreciate that. So we hope to see you there, and thank you, and have a good night and enjoy our refreshments.